Today I'm sitting in front of Jo Willmott, who I've had the opportunity to spend not 2 days with because I was busy running. I've been busy running around, but at least a little bit of time. And Jo, you work for the Institute of Social Relations for Aboriginals. Nope.
Relationships Australia,
Relationships South Australia. Mm-hmm. Okay, and you are here in Melbourne, and I eavesdropped for a couple of days because you're doing a workshop with a foundation called Children's Ground, who have some projects with the Aboriginal community, and you were workshopping us white folk, I suppose, trying to get us to understand what's going on. And you've certainly fascinated me, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about your life and how you got to do this, and where how you ended up where you are now. So where were you born?
I was born in a mission called Cherbourg Aboriginal Mission, southeast Queensland, and I come from 2 generations previous to mine of Aboriginal people who are part of the stolen generations, and I also was taken from my mum and placed in an institution, what they call the Girls' Dormitory in Cherbourg, and never understood why it is that we were incarcerated into a mission and other people into settlements and reserves. Growing up there, we left in 1960, 66, 67, and in 1967 Aboriginal people were given the freedom to leave those missions and reserves and those clusters that they set up for Aboriginal people to be contained and controlled, apparently under the Protection Act, for our own good.
For your own good, but you've been living in Australia, Aboriginal people have been living in Australia fine for hundreds
over
of
60,000 years. Yes, exactly. And I guess the protection was actually about allowing freedom for non-Aboriginal people to participate in land grabs and from Aboriginal people, so that incarceration meant that Aboriginal people were under a Protection Act, and the only way Aboriginal people could move around effectively was by having a permit, and if you didn't have a permit, you could be incarcerated into another mission or taken miles away from your own family.
Okay, but
that's the beginning of my life.
That's the beginning of life. Yeah. That's. I suppose we go. The question of would be, for me, is that why did you need to be? Well, why did the settlers, Australian government, whoever, decided that you needed to be contained
and incarcerated? Well, I guess it served their purpose economically to be able to amass the wealth of land, and also Aboriginal people became the indentured slaves of building up that land mass, supporting the industry. People go, Australia was built, the Australian economy was built on the sheep's back, but actually it was on the backs of black men and women and their children, and a lot of them were paid little or no money, and a lot of Aboriginal people, including my parents, are still fighting today for that money to be returned to them, because it was their hard-earned money.
So they never got paid, did they?
Yes.
Even though they did work,
they worked virtually 23, 22 hours a day, and were allowed back in the mission over the Christmas New Year break, or unless something else was happening. So there's a whole lot of non-Aboriginal people who are my age or a little bit older or might be a little bit younger who would have recognised that there were Aboriginal people who were doing domestic work, doing yard work, and also who were drovers for their large pastoral leases, and these people were paid sugar, flour and tea, basically, as their wage. So how do you sustain your family who had the wealth of the land to be able to pick and choose the what everybody looks for today is natural, organic foods that were at their beck and call, and they were being shifted and shafted to various corners of Australia, and their children being taken. So being part of that sort of...
And you were one of the children who were taken.
Yes.
And where were you taken to?
My mother was taken to Sherbrooke Mission.
Right, your mother.
And when she had me, I was taken off her. And in my records, my father was actually banned from the mission. So also in those days, the missionaries and the authorities in the reserves and missions could choose who Aboriginal people could marry as well.
Oh, okay, that's nice of them.
Yeah. Well, it was up to them and as to who would be the most appropriate. There's a lot of Aboriginal people affected by that. There were lots of Aboriginal women who were raped on those pastoral leases, who had children, had them taken off them, put into institutions, in orphanages, etc. And it created a whole lot of division. So can you imagine, Pat, if you don't know your mother? No, if you never lived with your mother? If you never got to know who your grandmother was? If you didn't know who your relatives were? That you were just growing up being an individual that's been locked away for no other reason than because of your race.
Yeah. Now, no, I can't imagine that. So, what did you know about your history? Certainly, that must have been, and I know you talked about this weekend about losing the culture. If you didn't know your history, your grandparents or your mother, what do you know about your history? Other than did you find out about that, or is it you just one of many people who just sort of lost a lot of your history?
We were whipped or flogged if we spoke our language or spoke any part of the language. We were also flogged if we ate any of the native foods. I mean, there were older people around constantly who would give us information, tell us the stories, some of the stories, but it was all hidden away, and we loved it. We'd hear the songs from the old people. In fact, what they did like as non-Aboriginal people was having Aboriginal people who were from the region who could do the performances and entertain non-Aboriginal people. So it was fine to entertain people, but not to be part of the devil, heathen, pagan practices that they believed had an influence on Aboriginal people in being ungodly. But it was good for entertainment purposes. And for me, hearing a lot of those old people, I just had this yearning to understand who I was, and that I didn't believe the church was where I needed to find my answers, because we went to church constantly as kids, you know, to Sunday school, to youth groups, and then to the church services. So you can imagine out of a whole week, if most of that week was all taken up by church as well as school, that you'd feel somewhat, well, for me, I was conflicted because I was hearing all of this stuff about whiteness and God, and yet here I was an young Aboriginal kid, and I was starting to recognise that there was a lot of injustice. But I also was interested in who were we as a people growing up. And when we left the mission, I really wanted to go and experience and to understand what was part of the dignity of who I was as an Aboriginal woman, as a black woman. and as a Waka Waka woman, I couldn't find out about my culture and my heritage. So I travelled and I went to Central Australia and was taken in by
just double checking it's working. So it is. Sorry to interrupt you.
By the older women, and taken out onto country, and just participated. Wanted to learn more. Wanted it not to be something that was mine. It was about me understanding my history and my identity as being Aboriginal. And the Central Desert was far removed from where I came from. However, people still understood their law, had their language, and can talk about the sophisticated nature of having a universal view about life and everything that culminates in being intertwined and connected and very much the fabric of life. Our essence was the essence of the spirit of the universe, and that starts with the ancient university. And wherever you travel and traverse the globe or our ancient landscape, there are all of this information and knowledge that Aboriginal people could access, written in the landscape, written in the skies. They practice it through telling stories over and over again, singing the songs and dancing. And today, in modern society, they're now recreating that on a modern media, and that is on canvas, so that that information, that knowledge, those stories, those songs that are so ancient can travel and traverse this huge globe, and people don't even understand the significance of that, but it's drawing in everyone to understand and be a part of this oneness within our universe and the ancient university.
It's when you talk about this, it echoes so much of. I mean, I like to read quite a lot of religious or self-help books. Actually, not religious, but whether it's Hindu or Buddhism or Christianity, a lot of the stuff that I've been reading is about the world connecting with the world, connecting with the universe. We're all one, and this is sort of exactly what you're saying. And though I haven't really heard, I understand a little bit because I've been up to the Coburg Peninsula there, and I got a little bit of an understanding spending a week or so up there about how connected with the earth. And I suppose at the time, hearing some of the stories, I thought, oh, that's a bit silly. I don't really understand that. And then I thought, well, what makes this silly? Maybe this is right, and what I understand is completely wrong. And the more I read it, the more I read about things, I can see the total connection with the soul of the world, as they call it. As being a big, I don't know, maybe we're just a bit silly. Western, so this ancient wisdom, where is it now? Where is it now with the young Aboriginal people?
There is a disconnect because of the history I've talked to you about, and all of the legislation, all of the controls that are taken away from the ancient teachers who know the world and know our place as humans are being pushed further and further away.
When you say that, you mean that the teachers are disappearing or they're being pushed
Absolutely.
out? So the older people? Okay, so
who hold all of this knowledge, who can...
So where are the older people?
Well, a lot of them, as you know, if you look at the disadvantage and the data around the health of Aboriginal people, high incarceration of Aboriginal people, But you have to go back to the history of invasion in this country and the theft of the land and the significant massacres that took place in pushing Aboriginal people off country, the diseases that were brought, so wiping out masses of all of this knowledge. But we need those leaders who still hold parts of it to be able to take people back on country, to read the earth, to read the signs that are around us everywhere. As one old man said to me, that you can never take it away because it's always there. It is written. The pages of our books are the landscape, and wherever you look, you can turn those pages, but it isn't like the paper that Westerners actually bring to their learning. In fact, that paper can burn, it can get blown in the wind. It's just like the dust that is blown across the landscape. But with what we've learned and what we know, that is rock and it's solid, and it is the ancient university, that it's embedded in the core of the earth and the spirit of our soul being totally connected.
The younger players. What's again? Just paint me a picture, because I feel, and as you know, I've expressed this to you before, but I'm quite embarrassed the fact that I really don't know what's going on in the Aboriginal community. I left Australia, other than a couple of months, a year maybe, come back for tennis, but pretty much 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I assumed that things would have progressed a lot, and you'd be. I believe there's paint a picture for me of where, say, I'd like to go to Alice Springs. I know the children's ground are involved in Alice Springs. Paint a picture of me of what's in Alice Springs for young people.
Well, it's a bit of a paradox, really, because on the one hand you have people speaking their language, having strong culture, but it is that kind of junction of where the cultures clash. So you live in London, and the experiences you have in London are just a macrocosm of what happens in that micro world of people in Alice Springs and other townships where there are large populations of Aboriginal people. So the things like drugs and alcohol, the lack of housing for Aboriginal people, the lack of real access to education, and a whole lot of racist ideology around marginalising Aboriginal people around access and equity to services. You will see a huge industry of non-Aboriginal people who look after and take care of Aboriginal people, but they're not the right people to be actually deciding and influencing what are the programs that are really required. How do we rebuild the infrastructure that actually supported the fabric of our relationships, who we were connected to, and how our language groups held the law and our whole way of life together. That has not been rebuilt, and there's nothing replicating that Western culture has actually supported, i.e. putting in place the scaffolding, so that when you're building, you make sure that you build a strong and safe foundation, and then you've got to have the appropriate scaffolding to put all of those other things that require some real stability in holding together the strength of what it is you're hoping to achieve. So building a community requires a whole lot of things, and that has never happened for Aboriginal people. They've had things done to them, done for them, and now that it's not working, everything's failing, it's Aboriginal people who are blamed for all of that. So when I sit and watch the TV, I see white faces. When I walk down the street, there is no place that I can call my own where I feel safe as an Aboriginal person. Because what I've grown up with, a whole lot of racist attitudes towards me as a black person, and all of those young people feel unsafe in a very, very white-dominated world. And we know that Western media keeps perpetuating this myth that people in Australia need to fear Aboriginal people because we're dangerous, we're criminals, we're felons, and that shouldn't trust us. There are lots of young Aboriginal men and women out there who are growing up in fear around, they know that if non-Aboriginal people see them, they would be thinking, what are they up to? What have they just done? And do I need to go that way? And in fact, in my training, which I've been doing for quite a number of years, a lot of non-Aboriginal people say to me that if they're walking down the street and there's, maybe 3 or 5 Aboriginal men walking down the street, straight away they have a real fear. Well, we know the history of what non-Aboriginal people have done in this country around the brutality, the violations, the massacres, the murders. All of those things are within our living history, yet white people think they have the right to think that we're the ones who are the most brutal in our own country. And we don't have an economic base in this country.
You don't have... Okay. What I hear, and I know you hear this as well, but there's I talked to somebody overseas who is a foreigner who was living in Australia. His sister was living in Australia, and then she said, well, I hear Aboriginal people get plenty of money, and they're fine, and they're just not trying. This is not the first time I've heard this, and I'm talking about going to your course. It was a big eye opener for me. I don't particularly listen to that stuff, but this is not the first time you've heard that, and you talked about that a lot. Where the hell does that come from?
Well, when you're white, you have a right to judge other people based on your own credentials. Even if you've stolen everything from other people, like their land, their future economy and their aspirations for their own kin to inherit, and take stewardship, the responsibility and care, so that they are taken care of in the future. And it always interests me how non-Aboriginal people think and believe that Aboriginal people do get everything. And I actually have said constantly in my training, if that was the case, do you think I'd be putting myself in front of all of you, making all your racist statements and comments about black people? And they do, because that's the forum to start, being rigorous in our debate, being hyper-vigilant around what are the real stories and what do you really know. So when I say to people, I've heard that Aboriginal people get a lot of money, I'm still waiting after 40 years for that one person who keeps telling me at every training I do, take me down to where I can get all of that money. Because I'd be really quite happy. And in fact, I'd bring all my families and their families and more families to say, here's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that we apparently are the only people that have access to. And if we do get all of this money, why are we so disadvantaged, and why are we living in abject poverty 235, 40 years after invasion in this country, when prior to that, Aboriginal people were the most healthiest and wealthiest people on the planet, because they took care of it in such a way that it gave back to them, and they knew it was there in perpetuity for the future generations.
What's if this has happened in 230 years, odd 30 years? What's going to happen in the next 50 years, 100 years to Aboriginal people?
What's going to happen in the world? Yeah. What are non-Aboriginal people learning about the role they are playing in destroying all of these natural resources that isn't infinite? It's not going to be there forever. And how are we going to survive in the future if we just keep stealing? As most Indigenous cultures say, we are only borrowing from the future. And if we're only borrowing, then what are we doing in paying back so that they live with our legacy of leaving for them what we have to leave for them as their legacy? How do non-Aboriginal people value their future generations and what they see are the opportunities for them? You can't keep stealing from the earth. There has to be some payoff. And we already know that high numbers of natural habitats around the globe have been destroyed.
Sure.
So, what is it that makes people think around we keep taking but we don't give back? We keep destroying but we don't rebuild. And the earth, the seas, the waterways are all being polluted. I hear non-Aboriginal people say, Aboriginal people, they make a big mess and there's lots of rubbish scattered around their homes and stuff. Well, go and look in the ocean to see where white people put all their rubbish, because they hide it away. And in fact, isn't there one island just off New York somewhere that's just total garbage?
That's right, yeah.
Yet they have the audacity to blame First Nations peoples for being dirty and unhygienic. That will all come back to haunt us. That's what you're leaving for your future generations, for all of us. And we're destroying the waterways, but also our food source, our clean air. Where will it end?
Speaking of the health, I don't know exactly the statistic, but the life expectancy for Indigenous people is frighteningly low, and the health facilities that are provided are. I'm guessing they're not like the hospitals here in Melbourne.
Well, the reality is that when you have non-Aboriginal people deciding how you divvy up the country's economy and where the priorities lie, I can tell you now, poor people and black people probably are at the bottom of the rung in regards to having some influence over what's the best way of improving our health status and standards. We have healers. We are back home trying to encourage more and more of our healers to participate in mainstream. In fact, a lot of non-Aboriginal people go and seek out Aboriginal healers, medicine people, who can help people through a process of becoming well. They don't work against modern medicine. They want to work collaboratively with modern
what
health.
We would call alternative therapy, but you would call
it's traditional health.
Alternative is probably pills.
Is modern medicine. But the thing about health is no one talks about the intergenerational trauma. If you and your family have lived
talking about stress here,
and trauma, deep, profound, spiritual, emotional, physical, intellectual trauma, that is a continuum. It's almost like it's a theme that runs through each generation. They carry that.
Like a life thread of passing down of fear, trauma from generations. No, I've heard. Then I've done some therapy on that where you go back and you heal issues in your past, so past life therapy. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. But this is what we're talking about. We're talking about traumas that have happened to you way down the line, and because they were traumatized, that's passed down to their children and to their children, and et cetera, et cetera.
And the practices, and that's where my training comes in, to get non-Aboriginal people to see the damage that they continue to do. Like, stop doing that. Stop believing you have the right. You have that white privilege around judging other people's values, their belief systems, and their way of life. Because you've created that deficit model, and you keep building deficit programs that really don't actually make a real difference in people's lives. In fact, for a lot of Aboriginal people, they think a whole industry of middle-class white people who really benefit from the ill health, the disadvantage, the oppression of Aboriginal people. So that trauma you say you had to deal with, you could go back and deal with all of that. But is there a constant in your life where all of that trauma and those impacts of what is happening out there that re-traumatizes you, has that stopped for you?
Oh, yeah.
But for Aboriginal people, it's constant, because we walk down the street, we know that we're being targeted.
Is Australia, being blunt, white people, and you said this, you said if you don't, you're racist by association. You're pretty blunt about that. You say if you really are racist by association if you don't do something. That really hit home to me. I thought, shit, I am racist by association. And I was horribly embarrassed about that. And it brought tears to my eyes. I thought, yeah, if you don't do anything, if you stick your head in the sand, and I've got a great excuse. I live in London now, so I'm sticking my head in the sand now. My head's popping up. But do the average Australian, are they as stupid as me, or are they just ignoring things? White person, white Australian.
Why would you question anything if all you're doing is benefiting from the oppression of other people? You're not living Aboriginal people's lives. No. So, of course, you're not going to feel or witness or be a part of that. But you are living with the benefits of what that means. Yeah. And what's got you to think about, hang on a minute, I don't know enough about what's happened in this country, but I could live my whole life as Pat Cash, poster boy, pin-up boy, playing the good game and being loved by the country, being loved in the world of tennis. But actually, what's happening to other people? What gave you the opportunities to be able to be all of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was lost for words here. Yeah, but I had, going back, my father gave me the opportunity. He was very poor. He was one of 10 people. He studied hard. Before that, they were farmers from South Australia. Before that, they probably stole your land. Probably bought your land.
Yeah, they bought it probably, but he was able to benefit from it. He built his wealth. Aboriginal people didn't get to build their wealth. They were not, in a lot of places, allowed to buy any property. Their own land. Yeah. So how do you develop an economic base if you can't buy land, if you can't be paid, and then you can support your family to evolve and develop and to be able to amass and acquire all of that economic base to support your family in achieving and having goals and aspirations in life that they have a right to. That was only privileged by Aboriginal people being slaves and looking after those properties and being in as domestics in those homes and being sent back into missions and reserves. And for a lot of people, particularly in Queensland, their money was held in trust for the Queensland government. In fact, I could give you some names of some booklets whereby the money, when it was found that there was so much money in the kitty on trust for Aboriginal people, was used to build roads. It was used to build councils. It was used to build hospitals. Hospitals that Aboriginal people could not actually use. So whilst all of that was going on, people were having their children taken away from them. People were actually, when your father was probably making a name for himself, building his economic base, giving to his children, even though he was struggling, but he was still acquiring. Whilst he was doing that, you take the opposite of another man of his age and his ilk, being Aboriginal, working to try and eke out a subsistence for his family, but living in abject poverty, but not ever amounting to anything because he wasn't given the same opportunities. In fact, we were an inferior race, and we continue to be, because the wealth doesn't go towards Aboriginal people. Whose land was it originally? If we went and took over Europe, England tomorrow, and did exactly the same thing, the English would be right in wanting to fight for the very essence and spirit of who they are.
And they do, they have, that's what wars are about.
So why is it that Aboriginal people don't have a right to have access to those very opportunities that give them hope, give them aspiration, but also takes care of what our ancestors have left in our hands to be responsible for and have the stewardship of this great nation for the future generations? We're not living our responsibility and duty of care. That's been taken out of our hands as Aboriginal people.
Oh, that's really responsible and duty of care of the land. So yeah, I think it'd be probably better. Your hands, Aboriginal hands, better than Western hands. They seem to be digging a few things up, taking everything out of it. So where are we? What would you like to see? What would you like to see happen?
What I'd like to see, but what's realistic, is that it's not up to Aboriginal people to challenge the system. It's full of people like you, Pat. You're busy, you're making a name for yourself, you're creating wealth, you're actually out there being the poster boy. And the poster girls are out there. Everybody's busy getting what they want, where they can, and wanting to be, comfortable. Living their life. And not really caring about, actually, why are there people living in poverty? Why is there all of this oppression? How is that created? How can you have extreme wealth and on the other side have extreme poverty? Why is it that one man is worth more than another man? Why is it that one woman is worth more than another woman? We're all born in the same way onto this earth, and we then all go back into the earth, except for a few people want to be sent out to other planets, and that's fine. But it is that stuff about, we're not here forever. It is what we leave. That is what's important. And Aboriginal people need people to educate themselves, to read the history in this country, to become better informed about how you create a better society. And if you're willing to give up your own greed, your own sense of importance, your egos, and say, I need to sit on the ground, and we need to be working through how we challenge our society and what it's become. Is this the society we want your children, my grandchildren to actually benefit from? I don't think so, because who's to say who are going to be the people who are going to control what it is that's coming in the future?
It seems. What about some baby steps? What would be the first things that you could say? For
care.
somebody like me.
To care.
Somebody like me or my mates who live here in Melbourne and their families. And
Pat, do you care? Do you want to show people genuine concern and care? What does that mean? What does that look like to you? Where's your curiosity around what's a caring world? How can I show people that I'm really genuine, I'm really interested? Because shit, it gets really hard, man. And so when the going gets tough, will you go get going? Because lots of people have joined joined the struggle and said we need to challenge the system. But it is about taking baby steps. It is about saying, how would I feel if somebody came to me and said, what if I came to you and said, Pat, I need to help you because you're not doing very well, mate. In fact, I think you're really screwed. And I can help you. Doesn't make you feel good that someone's actually devaluing you because you're feeling inadequate. So it is about you have to think around what makes a difference, what is real, what is it that you can give that's real, and that is important, and that shows that you got the gumption and you're in there forever. We talk about cultural fitness, that it's like if you join a gym, you're going to be useless if you join up and you don't use all of that equipment in the gym for the rest of your life until you drop off the perch. You know your fitness has to go on forever. You've got to do the right thing by your body in all ways. Every aspect of your health is critically important. So joining the gym means that, yep, I've determined that I'm going to ensure that I reach this goal. But that's a lifetime commitment. So when you say, what is it that I can do? Are you willing to stand the long term struggle that it's going to take?
Yes, it seems like a long term
and
struggle.
You're going to climb that mountain. You're going to go out and have a party with your mates one night, and at 6 o'clock in the morning you've got to get up and go back to the gym and hop on that machine and, make your body get back into its fitness again. Whatever it is about, actually people think it's just simple, that it has to be this or it has to be that. There are all sorts of ways. You can look at what are the needs in Aboriginal communities, in an urban environment, in a rural environment, in a remote environment, and start looking at what's the infrastructure that people do need in these communities. We have country towns, and then you have Aboriginal communities. Country towns have got more resources and facilities, like all of the things you take for granted. A shopping centre, leisure centres, post office, somewhere where you can do all your registration and all of those things, utilities, etc. Go into an Aboriginal community, you see none of that. In fact, a lot of Aboriginal communities are still waiting to be bitumised. So the vehicles that people use in communities, because of the bad corrosion on those roads, their vehicles break down a lot quicker. So of course blackfellas are bloody, wasting all their money on motor cars. But for them to get from A to B, they need that, like anybody else. So it is about what are you willing to contribute to, and how do you get governments to actually look at it in a more common sense of what's the infrastructure that supports a healthy, fully functioning community as everyone has a right to anywhere in the world, and make sure those things happen rather than keeping on blaming Aboriginal people. Oh, your kids aren't going to school. Well, school is a possibility when you've got all of that other social chaos in some sort of order. But you've got to build the right resources and infrastructure to support that.
How can Australia claim they're the first world country when the Aboriginal people haven't got bitumen, they haven't got basic facilities? Talking about fresh water, I haven't been in interior forever. What's it like? I mean, what's the housing like? How many people are living in a house? I mean, is it fresh water?
Well, you do have piped water.
I heard that.
And there are places where it's turned off, and there are places where the water, depending on what's happening, you know how you have power outages in the urban environment? Well, they can go on forever in remote communities. And who cares? There's a whole lot of things that are under the radar in regards to remote communities that people have no idea about, because you know what? Quite frankly, people don't care. Out of sight, out of mind. Yep. So to actually recognise that there is a problem, people have to recognise and acknowledge there is a problem, and it is not the doing of the people that it's been done to. Because Aboriginal people in good faith understand that governments make all these decisions and say what resources need to go where and what sort of training is required to support Aboriginal people to be able to deliver and maintain that infrastructure. Has that happened in those communities? No. In fact, if there was any corruption in those communities, who would know? Who are the watchdogs? Who are the people surveilling the areas, making sure that, have you got a business background if you're wanting to set up a business in an Aboriginal community? Who questions that? Who has the authority? Aboriginal people are kind of relying on non-Aboriginal people coming into the community being the best placed people to do the work that they're supposed to be doing. But who monitors that?
Oh, really?
Who understands, what white people understand that actually we should be monitoring what sort of people, what is the calibre of people going to those communities. So
there's no regulations or...
No. Well, Aboriginal people will employ people, but what do they know about white man ethics? Yeah, right. So you can go in there and become a good mate and get along with people. In the end, you could head up a community. Like, who knows what your skill base is, you know? Yeah. What are you able to incorporate and build as a capacity into a community? You're a tennis player. You know how to hit a ball, but who's going to make sure that if you want to apply for a community position, that you've got that? There are some very genuine non-Aboriginal people who are wonderful people who do work in those communities. But on the whole, if this kind of is across the board and it's affecting a whole lot of Aboriginal people, then we need to be questioning how that works and have independent auditing of what's really going on in our communities.
Well, Jo, I've probably talk on forever, but I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
And I don't really know what to say. I was going to say good luck or whatever, but I just feel like...
No, you have to say, I believe if I really want to do something, I have to make a real commitment and not sit here and bullshit you, Jo. I need to do something about it because I can't now know what I do know and allow it to continue.
I feel
because all of us are in it together. We need to challenge ourselves. It is hard work. And you have a duty of care and a responsibility to your children, your grandchildren, because it's their future that we're looking at. We won't be there. They're going to inherit either what we create with beauty and care and love, or what we create through destruction. It's our choice. And I want to hear you say you are willing to do what needs to be done, but you're not going to step in and try and be the saviour or the missionary or the mercenary or the misfit, that you do it with genuine care.
Well, I'm guessing there's a lot of people who meant well who haven't actually done well. Who've sort of had the intention of, I'd like to make a difference, do something, but have sort of backfired. And I get the feeling that seems to be a little bit of what the white man has done. It's like, I'll come and help you, I'll fix you up. But maybe it's not. It seems to me it's not really that. It's empowering the Aboriginal people, giving them an opportunity to.
I think non-Aboriginal people on the globe need to look at their privilege and their power and their influence around the globe. And there is a document that was put together by some First Nations people in America called the Doctrine of Discovery, and they put together a video to give to the Pope when he went to New York a couple of years ago. And they believe that's when that whole concept of theft of First Peoples' land came from, around the doctrine, the Interceptor Bull from 1643, where when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, he was given freehold from the Catholic Church to go out and take the lands from the pagans and the heathens. But I'd actually recommend that you try and encourage people to have a look at that, as to that history. So how can you say, go out there because we're not Christians? But maybe we are better Christians than those Christians who say, let's talk about the God of love, but actually they preach the God of hate.
Yeah, that's a whole other ball game of being a Catholic schoolboy. I grew up with a fear of God, well, allegedly fear of God. I changed my belief completely on that, but that was certainly the way that we were raised, and certainly the way that, as you said, the Spanish came into South America and just took everything, and with guns and force. But anyway, that's a whole other ball game.
Well, it is a part of that continuum. And if you really, as I said earlier, you've got to be better informed, you've got to read what's out there, you've got to talk to more people, you've got to work out how to monitor my own behaviours around being a hindrance or a help. And am I helping myself? And when do I recognise that I'm the problem? Because I keep amassing and taking from other people who should have more. And it's a hard one to come to terms with, how we all live our lives and how we live, noticing that others don't actually have a right to that. I mean, you travel through Europe, people sleeping on the streets, snow, it's freezing cold. Who cares? When we talk about Aboriginal people here and how we just can't get it together, but for hundreds of thousands of years they lived comfortably and in balance on this earth. And the very people who are mocking us and judging us, if you go to their countries and see what it is that they have and what they've brought here, it's what they've brought here.
Well, you didn't want diseases? There's a little poster in the side of the children's ground. It was along the lines of, we had the best health, we had the best this.
Yeah.
We
David Goldpool. no bombs, no poverty, no homelessness, no drugs, no alcohol. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we're supposed to be
the uncivilized ones.
Uncivilized, yeah.
And the other one was having problems with both people. So did we, and we still do.
Yes.
So there are lots of things, and don't be disheartened because you can only take one step at a time, Pat. But it's about what it is you feel you've got something to offer, but ensure that you're not treating Aboriginal people as inferior, that we are your equal, and we can work together to make a difference. It's about how we do it, and that you don't become a curious tourist, but you want to get in there and get your elbows dirty so that you are up for the challenge and for the change.
Well, let me say thank you for informing me. Give me a very informative few days, Jo, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your time.